So we will engage in a town hall where we have, where questions are welcomed, and for us to engage in dialogue that really has us thinking about the future of Canada. And so would like to just extend my greetings to each one of you, and thank you for helping us to fill this space, and looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have.
Okay. Thank you, President Ottmann. My name is Allan Adam. You think once it is Fond du Lac, Saskatchewan, it is Suntlane, doing Janut, they'll say, you must see no less resi than I saw. Then Telu, June, John, then Nide, no health at Daha, but oral Karut in Deno Baho. A board by Bazi, a board and a healthy da, vice chair has Leon, yeah, doing Janut, they'll see, must see no less resi, no Hilsuwa and Denison. So I just want to welcome you all. My name is Allan Adam. I'm from Fond du Lac, way up north. I just drove in this morning. Just kidding. The roads are impassable now. Impossible to drive. Got to wait for the lake to open, and then we can come by boat. But I live in Prince Albert. I live in the south now. I'm the vice chair with the Board of Governors. So on behalf of the Board of Governors, I want to welcome the Prime Minister to the university today and wish you all well in the questions as well as, you know, the answers that we're going to be getting. And I thank the elder for the prayer that was just done this morning, or this afternoon, Masicho. And I believe there was pipes as well too that were lifted. Masi.
Thank you, Allan, for your words. Thank you, Jacqueline, for your incredible welcome. Thank you, Elder Margaret. Where are you sitting? There you are. Thank you very much for that prayer as well. What a pleasure it is to be here today. What a pleasure it is to see so many people out. It is really, really important that in our communities, in our countries, in our democracy, we can have conversations about where we're going, about how we're getting there, about the different perspectives we all share and bring to this discussion. Because that's what politics is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about how we work together as a larger community to figure out where we're going and how we're going to get there in the best possible way. And that doesn't happen by putting your fingers in your ears and shouting at the top of your lungs. It happens through listening. It happens through engaging. It happens through understanding that democracy is built in conversations like this, where we learn from each other through questions, through answers, through perspectives we need to share. We learn it as well as we reflect on the experiences of people in other corners of the country, living through different things as well. And that's why, for me, being able to get out across the country like this and engage and meet with people and hear what's on your minds as we're charting a path through some really difficult times. Because let's be honest, these last few years have been really, really challenging. Overlaid with the crisis of the past decade, which has been climate change and the increasing impact of extreme weather events and the increasing understanding that we need to make sure we are protecting the ecosystem services, our natural environment, the heritage that we want to deliver to our kids for generations to come and not ruin right now. And that's a lot of anxiety for people. Layer on to that the challenge of the pandemic, which really threw us all for a loop and has impacted us economically with disruptions in supply chains, with shortages and really challenging times, and lots of people for their jobs, for small businesses, but at the same time has led to a lot of real struggles with mental health that people have had. This was a time that really knocked a whole lot of people down and hard, and we have to figure out how to make sure we're supporting people as we get back into a world that has been changed by that. Layer onto that the challenges that came through and beyond the pandemic, whether it was Black Lives Matter and understanding systemic discrimination and racism that is really, really evident. As soon as you have a crisis of that scale, the most vulnerable always get it a lot harder than anyone else. And that has reminded us of the inequalities and the challenges, whether it's within our healthcare systems or whether it's in our education systems, whether it's whatever systems we have around us. There's an understanding that we need to do a better job of responding and including to the various realities that people live when they're confronted with the institutions that we've built up over decades and generations that weren't always built for the full diversity of this beautiful country we've been able to really develop over the past years. On top of that, Russia decided to invade Ukraine and overturn decades, if not 80 years of a global, stable system that led to incredible prosperity and opportunity for people all around the world. The UN Charter, the institutions we build up to create this level of peace and stability around the world has been disrupted, which of course led to real direct impacts like higher fertilizer prices, higher energy prices, food shortages in Western countries, higher prices in Western countries, but food shortages and even famines in certain parts of the world because of Russia's decision. But it's also one that has larger impacts than just on Ukraine and those countries that stand with them. Every dictatorship in the world is looking at what Putin is doing to see if maybe that's not a model that they could take on, because, oh, hey, we have a larger army than our neighbor. Maybe we can redraw lines on a map. Oh, there's people who speak the same language as us on that side of the border, on the other side of the river. We should include them in our country as well. And that's something we've managed to avoid as a world for close to 80 years. And now that's all up in question. Add to that a backsliding of democracy. There are fewer democracies today than there were 20 years ago. That's not the direction we thought things would be going in. And in our democracies, we're seeing a weakening of positive, constructive public discourse. There's more polarization, there's more anxieties, certainly more populism that promises simple answers and not sort of the thoughtful progress that we need to have. But at the same time, people are, even though we have more methods of communications than ever before, people are listening to each other less and less, or listening only to the people that their algorithms select for them within their filter bubbles in their social media pages. And you get an amplification of narrow views or of disinformation, of misinformation, that is eroding at sort of the common conversation that is supposed to be ongoing for all of us in a democracy. Democracy doesn't mean we all have to agree, on the contrary. But it does mean that we all have to be aware that if everyone has an ability and a responsibility to contribute to the direction of our country, we should be engaging and exchanging on how we do that. And that's something that we're starting to lose a little bit, because so many political opinions or even political identities are now fashioned by what's on a bumper sticker, what's in a tweet, what's in a TikTok video, rather than real deep reflection, or at least honest reflection that starts from real facts and real reality in terms of that. So faced with all this, no wonder people are feeling anxious, because many of those things have directly contributed to the cost of living crisis we're living through right now, the high inflation that we've had that fortunately seems to be on its way down. According to most economists, we should be at a better place by the summer, significantly better, but food prices are remaining stubbornly high. Interest rates are high to try and get inflation down, and it's really tough right now. So our ability as governments, as individuals to participate in really robust conversations about where we're going is really, really important. And on that, I want to thank both the president of the university for welcoming this opportunity for us to have this engagement. I want to thank the Indigenous leaders and chiefs who are here. I want to thank Mayor Masters, who's here with us as well, Mayor of Regina. Thank you for coming out and being part of this conversation. I want to thank all the Indigenous people who are here, because this beautiful space is yours, and you're welcoming us into it. You're welcoming us into your territory for these kinds of conversations that are so important as how we move forward. And I want to thank everyone who is here. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to come and participate in something that should be at the core of our political process, our democracies, open conversations about where we're going and who we are and who we want to be, with all the richness of diversity, of perspectives, of stories that we bring to the table to inform the best way we can move forward and reach all those things that we have in common, that we aspire to. Better life for ourselves and our kids and our community. Flourishing identities and language that lean on each other and learn from each other. Good jobs that allow us to support our families, contribute to our communities, and best of all, assurances that our kids are going to have it better than us because of the work that we've done to build a better world for them. And that's one of the things that seems shaky sometimes in the world we're facing. Maybe we've reached that point where progress has peaked. And it's not true that the next generation is automatically going to be better off than the generation past. That's deeply destabilizing in a country like Canada that has always been built on that promise of progress. So I don't blame you for having a lot of things that you're worried about, a lot of things that you're wondering about. And my hope today isn't that I'm going to answer all your fears and have you leave here thinking, oh man, everything's awesome. But I do want to share with you some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of how we're going to solve these problems together, how we're going to ensure that we get back to that idea of the future being brighter than the present, that we have every capacity in the world to build together that future, that we have all the tools, that we have all the ability to do it, if only we lean in together in the right ways. I don't pretend to know all the right ways either, because that's part of the conversation we have, but I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you. So I know I sort of laid that out as a rather big and momentous conversation. If you want to ask me what my favorite color is, that's a good question too. I'm not 7, so I don't actually have a favorite color, except perhaps red, but that's a controversial political answer in Saskatchewan. But whatever questions you have for me, I'm really happy to take it. I'll try and get to as many as I can. So I'll try and keep my answers short, which is always a challenge for me. But what we'll do is we'll start with this section here, and then I'll just go around the room. So you guys have a lot of time to think about what questions you're going to ask me, but I'll spring it on you guys here for who has the first question for me. Just put up your hand. There you go. Yeah, you get a mic. Someone's going to run forward.
Hi.
And what's your name?
My name is Paula. I'm the university librarian.
Excellent.
So under Harper's previous Conservative government, many research libraries were dismantled and closed, with important research quite literally being thrown into dumpsters. As you are a former teacher, such as myself, I know you understand the importance of libraries because #libraries change lives. #libraries also fight fake news. Anyway. If the Liberals lose the next federal election, what safeguards are you putting in place to protect Canadian institutions, such as our array of libraries, including Library and Archives Canada and the CBC, which the Conservatives at both the federal and provincial level have traditionally and currently want to defund and dismantle?
One of the very first things we did when we took office in 2015, Paula, and you'll remember this well, was restore the long-form census, which, yeah, no, it gets cheers. It still gets cheers from some librarian quarters and science data geeks and stuff. But the idea that a government would deliberately do away with the most reliable tool to understand what people were going through from one community to the next in our country, to see very clearly, who's struggling, who's not, what are they struggling with, what kinds of things would help with it. To do away with that kind of data and evidence, particularly in the world we live today where it is so important to understand and have good grasp on data, was inconceivable, but it was emblematic of a lot of things. It was emblematic of a government that chose to put ideology, first and policy first, and then figure out the facts that could justify what they wanted to do second. And we committed to being a government that started to ground ourselves in facts and data, and then tried to figure out the best way forward. And as we all learned from the pandemic, science isn't some magical know-it-all tool. Science evolves and shifts, and one day we weren't wearing masks, and the next day, yes, you should probably wear masks, and there was all sorts of things revolving in science, but there was a grounding in science and data that we could build on that not just the government anchored itself in, and governments across the country did, but Canadians trusted in evidence and science. We got vaccinated to a higher degree than just about any other comparable country in the world, and that meant we had hundreds of thousands of fewer deaths than we should have compared to other countries our size, or the proportion of deaths in other countries. And that was because Canadians trusted in science and data and knowledge in a real way. We trusted those experts who said, this is what you do to stay safe. We trusted in governments to say, yes, you can stay home and we'll send you a paycheck to make sure that you get through it with the CERB. And that's how we all held together. So that's where science and data isn't just some abstract idea. It's a foundation for how we figure out how to move forward in the right ways. But you bring up a great question. What is it that we can do as a government to make sure that after we go, all the funding that we gave to media and quality news organizations, including the CBC, because honestly, and because you mentioned it, I can't help but pause on the fact that as I talk about democracy, the media has an extraordinarily important role to play in our democracy, in any democracy. They're here, yes, to report if I trip over the carpet and fall flat on my face, and that'll make the evening news. Whether I do it literally or metaphorically, they're there to capture that. But they're also there to ask really tough questions, and not just so they can expose or challenge people in power, which is extraordinarily important, but so that citizens can feel reassured that as you go through your daily lives, you've got a professional cadre of journalists there holding us to account on everything they do, alongside what the opposition is doing, alongside what other political parties are doing, in a way that reassures you that the tremendous power a government has is not being abused. That's what is so important in journalism. And when you have political parties or individuals who directly undermine and attack the independent professional work of journalists, and listen, I could write books about all the times I've disagreed with what journalists have said about me and about the conclusions they've jumped to, but questioning their right and their legitimacy to do that weakens our democracy and our values in fundamental ways. And quite frankly, what Mr. Poilievre did this morning, that you'll probably hear about later today, in attacking a Canadian press reporter because he said, oh no, the Canadian press sells a lot of its news clippings and articles to the CBC, and therefore you're defending the CBC, is questioning the core of our journalistic integrity in this country. And that's just a step away from undermining our faith in our entire democracy. So that's why it needs to be called out. But back to the question you were asking, how can we prevent as a government the next elected government from undoing the things that we've done? We can't. Because a government that gets elected has the power to undo things that a previous government that got elected did. That's a really important part of our democracy. Now, one thing that governments try to do is to do things that even if the opposition agrees with at the time or disagrees with at the time, will not undo once they move forward because it's too popular. I think of the Canada Child Benefit, for example. I see a lot of young families here. You guys know, hundreds of dollars a month, tax-free, means tested. It's lifted 500,000 kids out of poverty. It's part of what has lifted 2.7 million Canadians out of poverty over the past years. I don't think, even if Conservatives consistently ran against it in 2015, anyone's going to try and tell you that they're going to take away those hundreds of dollars a month that so many families rely on. So that's not something they're going to reverse. But I was able to reverse a whole bunch of things that Mr. Harper did that I thought were wrong-headed, including his cuts to science and libraries. And I had the mandate to do that. I got elected to do that. But that's where the real bulwark against backsliding or doing those things is making sure that citizens are valuing the things that they have and understanding what's at risk. Understanding how important elections are, and I know we have a lot of new Canadians here who come from parts of the world where elections are a dream. Free and fair elections are something that nobody would ever take for granted, and we sometimes do. But I feel like the teacher who's yelling at the kids who are absent and they're not there. You all showed up today. You showed up to be part of a political conversation as active, engaged citizens. So I have hope. I have hope, and I always do, and I always will. The Canadians, as they always have in the past, will be making thoughtful choices as we move forward. And in a democracy, people get the governments they deserve. And I think in Canada, that's a very good thing. I hope it is anyway. But thank you for your question, Paula. Another question from this section. There you go, you in the red shirt. Yes. Just over there. Just stand up.
Hi, I'm Zora. I'm a PhD student in U of R doing my PhD in microbial biogeochemistry. I made that name myself because biology is just not that fun, but microbiology is, and then microbiology biogeochemistry is fantastic. I'm happy you talk about the science because, you know, funding science is also important when we expect people to know about masking and vaccines and all, but when we are not funding education and science, it's just like, it's not adding up, and then we cannot suddenly expect the whole nation to know science. When you were 10, 1981, we were spending, am I right? You're not that old.
In 1981, I was only 10 for 6 days, but yeah, it was...
When you were 10,
yes.
We were spending 15.56% of our GDP on education. 40 years later, 2021, then that number was 10%. I'm not sure, like 10 more years, like 2030 or something, are we gonna spend like 5% on education and expect people to still expect science and know science? I want to know what is your government gonna do, and then how the perspective of spending money on education is gonna be reflected on your government. Are we gonna think that spending on education is like spending, or it's an investment for our future, for our kids? I'm so glad that kids starts making sound, because it's just reminding us that we have to think about the future. We have to think about, if she's going to be 10, is she also going to have 15.56% of his GDP working on his education or no?
Yeah. No, thank you very much for your question, Zora, and it's a very good one. Obviously, the federal government doesn't have control over delivery of K-12 education. That is a provincial responsibility for a very good reason, that the provinces have different dynamics, different stories, different histories, different perspectives, and on delivering K-12 education, like on delivering health care, that's responsibly an area for provincial jurisdiction, so people can make sure that they get the right education system for them. But the question really stands still as well. How do we make sure people are getting the best possible education for tomorrow? Not just even scientific literacy, but an understanding of critical thinking, of questioning things, of trying to think about way to evaluate facts and way to evaluate contradictory statements and figure things out. Young people need to be encouraged to question things. They do it naturally, but they should be able to be given the structures around it. And there's a lot of great programs teaching critical thinking along with reading, writing, arithmetic, and math, and science, and arts, and everything else. But, what's that? And libraries, lots of libraries as resources, yes, Paula. But there is one thing that the federal government can do and has done. We decided that there was no real reason why arbitrarily education should start at 5 years old or 6 years old. I mean, that's what we decided from a long time ago. But what it actually means is we are missing those early years that are so incredibly formative in how people grow and how they understand and how they show up in grade 1 with the tools to succeed or not are already going to be starting from far behind the starting line. That's why 50 years ago, the Royal Commission, or the report on the status of women, said number one thing we can do to improve this country would be move forward with the child care system. It took a pandemic to do it. The pandemic, where suddenly everyone, men included, realized how hard it is to be productive when kids are stuck at home. And we realized, okay, let's invest in childcare. I mean, it's a promise that the Liberal government has been working on for many, many years, but we've finally got the conditions and the ability to do it. And we invested in childcare across the country, and that's why here in Saskatchewan and in 6 other provinces and territories, or 5 other provinces and territories, they're already down to $10 a day. There's a few more still to come, but it has saved families hundreds of dollars a month at a time where groceries are really expensive and mortgages are going up, so that has helped in significant ways in really good timing. It has helped women get back into the workforce, which is great for opportunities for women to not have to choose between careers and families, because let's be honest, we're still in a society where women carry far more of the burdens around child rearing and household responsibilities. So giving that opportunity and that option is massive. It's also an economic opportunity, as we now have the highest labor force participation by women in Canadian history. And it's really great to make sure that kids show up in their schooling with a level of knowledge and learning from professional early childhood educators that make sure they're going to be able to benefit the most from their education. So there's a lot we can do as a federal government to support in education. We now are supporting early childhood education. We're also pouring a lot of money into institutions like this extraordinary university. And we will continue to do that at both ends, and trust that Canadians will demand of their provincial governments to continue to prioritize education, because it's so important for the world we're going to build tomorrow. Thank you very much, Zara. Okay, coming to this question. Yes, you in the beautiful, beautiful orange shirt.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister, for this opportunity. My name is Aseye. And I know that your government has done quite a lot when it comes to children. But I'm still going to ask this. You've done childcare. But with the way things are going now, it is increasingly becoming difficult to put our children in extra activities outside school. It's like everything else is going up except our wages. And so what suffers is you can barely even feed your children, so you have to put aside putting them in sports, music, and everything else that makes the children grow as a whole. And so the only thing they're doing is school. And I don't think that is going to give us the right, a totally brought up child for the future. So what is your government going to do to help families that are struggling in this area? Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you, Aseye, for your question. People are struggling right now for real. I was just at a grocery store earlier this morning and talking with families who were expressing to me just how hard it is to see food prices. Because, yeah, maybe inflation's coming down, but nobody's told the grocery stores yet. Food prices are still really, really high. And that's a huge pressure on families. Mortgages are going up because of interest rates. Rents are going up because of housing challenges. There's real challenges out there on cost of living for Canadians. And as a government, I'll be honest, we have to be very careful about just putting money into the economy to support people right now, because that will send inflation back up in the wrong direction and end up hurting people more, which is why we've had to be very, very targeted in this latest budget with a grocery rebate that's going to the 11 million Canadians who need it most. It'll be up to $467 at one point in the coming months, depending on how rapidly we're able to get it through Parliament for a family of, an average family of 4 who qualify. But there's other things we can do, and we've done around dental in targeted ways to make sure that families who couldn't send their kids to the dentist now can send their kids to the dentist. We're making sure that we're keeping up with the cost of living on seniors' benefits, on helping with student loans. So there's lots of things we are doing, but we have to do it in a targeted way. But ultimately, the best way we can make sure that you're able to afford these opportunities for your kids is to make sure you have a good job with growing wages and a strong career for the future, and you're part of a community that is thriving and growing, where there are opportunities, where you have choices, and there are good enough salaries and supports out there for the middle class in this country that unfortunately has been hollowed out over the past years. And this is not just a Canadian phenomenon. Indeed, it's not as bad in Canada as it is in many other countries. But it's a real challenge. We're seeing the results, or we saw the results over the past 4 years in the United States, or I guess 2 years to 6 years ago in the United States, under an administration that got elected just on the anger and the frustration of the middle class at being left out in the United States. Didn't have a lot in the way of solutions, certainly didn't leave the middle class better off, but boy, they targeted that anger in a very effective way. So how do we grow the middle class in this country? How do we make sure people can afford not just food for the families and their rent, but hockey programs for their kids, and music lessons, and to go on vacation down to Disney World every now and then? I mean, these are the kinds of things that people should be able to have, especially in a country as successful as Canada. And that means we have to be regrowing the middle class. Fortunately, we are better positioned than just about any other country in the world to do that. Right now, we have a growing population at a time where Western countries around the world are flatlining. Why? Because we continue to be a country that is not just open to immigration, that values immigration as a driver of community success, of opportunity, of growth for our economy. We're a country that has incredible natural resources at a time where people in Europe have understood their reliance on oil and gas from Russia. Cheap oil and gas from Russia for the 20 past years came with a very, very big risk that has finally caught up with them, that Russia is a country that does not share people's values and wants to see the people who are their customers in Europe destabilized. China has cornered the market on lithium, which is unbelievably important, not just for the cell phones in our pockets, but for the electric cars that are going to be 100% of the new cars sold in 2035. Just about all the lithium in the world right now goes through China. But Canada has lithium. Canada has the resources that the world needs, and Canada has mining expertise that is real and tangible. And at a time when the world is looking for better sources, more reliable partners to trade with, they know that Canada is not there to destabilize someone else's democracy. We are a reliable partner that wants to see Europe and partners around the Americas and friends in Asia succeed and be able to have those reliable supply chains, but also done in ways that are responsible environmentally, that are built on real partnerships with Indigenous peoples who have been stewards of this land for millennia and deserve to be benefiting with strong communities and good jobs from the bounty of the land that is so valuable in the world right now. We have tremendous opportunities for that. Right here in Saskatchewan, I just watched on Monday a handshake between Tim at the head of Cameco, who's selling Saskatchewan uranium to Ukraine, so that Ukraine's nuclear reactors that have always been reliant on Russian technology and Russian uranium, now they're not buying from Russia anymore, they're buying from Canada, from right here in Saskatchewan. The two largest producers in the world of potash outside of Canada are Russia and Belarus. But right here in Saskatchewan, we can be that reliable supplier to the world. We have a clean energy grid, which is why companies like Volkswagen is choosing to invest in Canada, why ArcelorMittal has made its first steel electric arc plant in the world, off of coal onto electric arc, in Hamilton. We have what the world needs right now, and we can demonstrate that we are there to support the world in this net zero economy we're trying to build by 2050. Canada and Canadians are incredibly well positioned for that right now. That's a big part of what this budget was about. So yes, there are elements in there to help you through this tough time right now, but there are things in there that are going to ensure good jobs and good careers for you and your kids for decades to come. And that's how you build a strong country. That's what we've been setting up for the past 8 years when we said the environment and the economy aren't in contrast, they have to go together. When we said reconciliation is, yes, the morally right thing to do to fix the broken and the broken relationship that we have with the First Peoples of this land, that we need to have to be the kind of country we like to pretend we are. But it's also about making sure we're actually able to get things done in partnership, in respect, so that First Peoples can flourish on this land the way they fully deserve to. It's about equality, making sure that the barriers to full participation of all Canadians in the workforce and in community life, regardless of race, regardless of religion or creed or color or gender or whatever, reducing barriers so that everyone can succeed. These are the building blocks of a society that works for everyone in the coming years. And this is what we're beginning to see now as the world looks to Canada as a place of excitement. So anyone who says Canada is broken right now doesn't understand Canada, and mostly doesn't understand what Canadians are able to do and about to do together. So thank you for your question. We'll go one more question from this section. Yes.
Welcome to Treaty 4 Nation. My name is Lucy Musco. I'm from Chegakina First Nation. And you just mentioned three things. I actually didn't have a question till you went over that. And
that's the way a conversation is supposed to work. So, yeah.
So, on March 28th, the AFN came out and there was, some talk about, really not being happy about some of the budget that came out. And, given that we are in the home of reconciliation right now, today you stand in the home of reconciliation, I call it. When will you sit down with the numbered treaties 1 to 11 to sit down with them and hear their concerns one-on-one to include them in that conversation of the budget?
Which part of the budget did you feel that people didn't like?
Like all the budget, like
all the budget.
Yes, just a town meeting like what's happening today. Like, will that ever take place within your party with the numbered treaties, just to hear their concerns of the budget?
Oh, I can tell you that we take extraordinarily seriously the process of consultation before the budget, where the heads of the national Indigenous organizations are met with, and we listen to their concerns on the things they want to see in the budget. That's why, for example, we're coming forward with $4 billion in this budget on an urban, northern, and rural housing strategy for Indigenous peoples, because we know that there are such needs in that, and that was a piece of something that was generated from those consultations. So we are always going to be very, very attentive to how to respond in the best possible way. And we're always open to more discussions and more consultations and more partnerships. We have co-developed many pieces of legislation together, including child and family services, Indigenous languages, and many other things. And we're going to continue to work together. There's a lot in this budget that I know a whole bunch of Indigenous people and in communities have been asking for and are very happy to see. If certain leaders of certain numbered treaties have specific issues with it, I'm happy to work with them on those things. But at the same time, we are the federal government for all Canadians, for everyone who shares this land. And my responsibility is to make sure that I'm taking into account all the concerns of Canadians, and that's what we do by consulting broadly with everyone about the budget we're going through. And if people are in disagreement with the budget, well, their MPs will be able to vote against the budget, as probably every MP in Saskatchewan will do right now. But that's a choice that Saskatchewanians have made, to not have anyone in the federal government. Yeah, I really hope that turns around, because when it comes to delivering things for Saskatchewan, you deserve to have a voice in different parties to speak up for you. I think many of you probably miss Ralph Goodale quite a bit, and the voice and the steadiness that he had. But there's an easy way to fix that, because we will have a slate of great candidates running in the next election, and I really hope people make sure that, that Saskatchewan once again has a voice within the federal government. Because I'm here now, and I'm listening to the concerns you have, but we will continue to work together with you. How about a question from over here? You in the red shirt in the front.
Tansei Tammy Nitsi-Gasson. I'm also working on a PhD. I have 2 questions, just kidding. And I'm really ridiculous, so sorry. My first question is, can I get a picture with you? And
Sure, I'll come over at the end, and we'll do that.
And then, I guess I work in languages, and my PhD is around language revitalization using art as a method. And I think, I guess I've been reading a ton about things that need to be done to revitalize Indigenous languages and help with Indigenous languages. And my 2 girls are right here, but they're learning French right now in a school by our house, which, thank you. But I think I'd like them to learn Cree, but the opportunity isn't there. And I think I've been trying, my mom's first language is Cree, and I've been trying to learn Cree like my whole life. But one of the things that I have read recently is the federal government has to make Indigenous languages official languages of Canada. And I wonder where you are with that, or do you think that matters? And what have you been doing to make that happen? And why hasn't it happened?
Thank you, Tammy. It's a great question. So many things. I promise to keep my answers short, and I've failed miserably so far. So I will again fail on this question, I'm sure. Language really matters. I mean, I do speak French. I'm a Quebecer, and Quebecers know, and as you see from Quebec politics and everything else, language is core to our identity and who we are. And the fight that Quebecers have had, that French Canadians have had, including French speakers right across the country, to protect the duality of the official languages in this country is a huge and important part of our history and of our present. And I think having 2 official languages is part of why we are such an open and welcoming country to different backgrounds, because unlike some countries that are wrapped up in a single identity of being, a typical Korean citizen or a typical citizen of Cameroon, or actually that's a bad example because there's 2 languages, there's English and French, but a typical French citizen, you see lots of people wrapped up in having trouble welcoming in immigrants because they don't share the history, the story, the background. Well, from the very beginning in Canada, There were three identities, if you want to be really simplistic about it. There was the indigenous people who welcomed in settlers to their chagrin, historically, of course. But there was that identity. But then there were two settler identities, English and French. And as we founded this country 155 years ago, there was an understanding that two peoples who could be completely different from each other, because back then the difference between English or French, Catholic versus Protestant, continental versus British, all the different mindsets that go with it, was as different as any two peoples you could point to in the world today. And we accepted that, okay, English and French get to be Canadian. You're fully Canadian, you're fully Canadian, which is why you come from any corner of the world now, and it didn't happen without ruffles and challenges. You get to be Canadian, as long as you like hockey and know what a poutine is. There are these touchstones that we have where we are defined by our shared values of openness, respect, a willingness to work hard, a desire to be there for each other and see your neighbors succeed, a willingness to be positively engaged with people around. These are the values, compassionate. These are values we share of Canadian, and it doesn't matter where you come from. These values are articulated in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and they form the core of our country. So having that duality from the beginning of English and French was very helpful in being the kind of open, confident country, resilient country that we are right now. But you're absolutely right. The languages spoke by the people who lived here for millennia are in deep, deep threat. And that is why a few years ago we co-developed Indigenous languages legislation called C91 that for the first time laid out an official status for Indigenous languages and invested massively in supporting communities to actually preserve and then augment and spread and teach and value those languages. And it's still in its early days of implementation, but it's something that we've taken very, very seriously and something we're going to continue to do, because you shouldn't have to choose between your kids learning French or Cree. They should be able to learn both. I know there's a lot of people in here who speak 3 languages or more. This is a richness for our society, and it is also something that goes to the core of culture. I remember a conversation years ago, before I really got very far in politics, where I went to sit down with former Prime Minister Paul Martin and asked him a whole bunch of different questions about a lot of things, but mostly we talked about Indigenous issues, because he's been so forward-leaning on supporting First Nations education and various foundations and programs. And he pointed out to me that even though, as we all know, the rate of youth suicide in Indigenous communities is way higher than in non-Indigenous communities, is something we absolutely have to address and challenge. There are some Indigenous communities in which the youth suicide rate, to use one metric, is actually lower than the average around non-Indigenous communities. And I said, okay, well, what's the secret? What's the difference? He says, those are the communities that grow up in their language, that learn traditional knowledge from their elders, spend time out on their land, understanding their identity, celebrate their culture, know who they are deeply and are proud of who they are, and language is a core element of that identity and that taking pride in who you are. And that's why residential schools were so adamant that if you wanted to remove the Indian from the child, you had to remove their language, because that was the way to destroy that culture. But let us remember that at the same time as residential schools were teaching Indigenous kids that their language had no value, that their culture had no value, every other school in every other corner of this country, non-Indigenous school, was also teaching the same thing, teaching us that Indigenous languages and culture had no value, that Indigenous identity had no value. And that's why reconciliation is not just between the government and Indigenous peoples. It is a thing for all Canadians, including new Canadians. to be part of, to understand that respecting language, understanding, making space for that, and supporting it, and giving you the opportunity to raise your two beautiful daughters in Cree as well as in English, and hopefully in French too, is a very good thing. And they may want to sit on the Supreme Court someday, so we'll make sure we get them some French too. But thank you, Tammy. Another question. Yes, you in the back. Sorry, we're giving you the mic.
Hi, my name is Jana, and I am, how do I describe myself? I am a medical doctor. I've been here in Canada. I have been unable to practice, of course, just because this is what's happening. There are millions of families across Canada that don't have physicians, family physicians. In addition to having a medical degree, I also, prior to coming here, worked as a registered nurse, spent many years in emergency room, many years traveling, doing flight nurse, emergency and trauma nursing, came to Canada and could only get a entry-level job in the Ministry of Health. And I thought to myself, okay, that's okay. This is temporary. And then it continued year after year, and I found myself kind of spiraling. And I said, what am I doing in a country that, you said it, welcomes immigrants? When we applied for permanent residency, it was my points, my degrees, that added value. And then I came to Canada to be devalued, to be unappreciated, undervalued. And I thought to myself, because I've treated Canadians before, so in my country. And the only reason Canadians wanted to come and go home wasn't because I was unable to treat them. It was because they had to pay. And we know Canadians don't like to pay out of pocket. It's the truth. Once they got the bill, it was time to go home. And so when we begin to talk about Canadian experience, many people travel. Canadians travel the length and breadth of the world. And they have to go and see a doctor at some point. And nobody is screaming Canadian experience, right? What are you doing in order to help this wastage of knowledge? Now, currently, I'm doing my master's. I'm just at the end of my master's in medical law and ethics out of the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And the thing that I really want to focus on is something that came up just recently out of the University of Saskatchewan. This complicitness when it comes to racism, when it comes to epistemic injustice, and not valuing the valuer, the knower, and not understanding that there is something that I bring to this table that can benefit the Canadian society. I don't want to be here and not practicing. And I've heard too many physicians in the same position. We want to be able to practice. We want to serve the community. That's what I've trained to do. That's what I've spent my life doing. And so what are you going to do in order to help medical doctors who are racialized? Don't leave it to the provinces, please. Don't give me that answer, because the provinces haven't done a very good job, because we would not have been in the mess that we're in right now. if they had done a better job. So what are you going to do to help the many physicians that are here, many healthcare providers that are here in Canada, unable to be licensed?
Thank you. You used the word wastage, Jana, and you're absolutely right. Because right now, not only is an eminently qualified doctor here not serving as a doctor, you're also not in your home country serving as a doctor either. You're not, you've all those years of training and you are not actually contributing anywhere in that level, in the way you were trained, the way you chose to train to your fellow citizens of the world. That is a huge problem. And it's one that, I know you said don't say it's the province's fault. Provinces deliver healthcare. They are in charge of delivery of the healthcare systems. But over the past year, I have had not a fight with the provinces, but a strong disagreement with the provinces around whether or not we were going to transfer money to them with strings attached or not for healthcare. And the provinces quite rightly said, well, don't you tell us how many nurses there have to be on an overnight shift on in the emergency ward, for example. Don't start micromanaging. I'm like, yeah, what does the federal government know? I mean, the one area we deliver healthcare services in Indigenous communities, we don't do a great job of that. We try very hard, but we're not some perfect model to show how everyone else should do it. So, no, we're not going to micromanage. But we are going to focus on making sure there are results. That's where the strings attached are around data collection and outcomes for this $200 billion that we're investing in healthcare across the country over the next 10 years. We're going to make sure we are measuring data. We're going to make sure that we're increasing the number of family doctors, because that is core. Having a family doctor is a huge determinant of the health outcomes for your family, for yourselves. Improving the access to mental health care rapidly and appropriately is hugely important as well. That's part of the things we're going to be measuring and doing. The third one is making sure we're qualified on data, making sure we're able to compare apples to apples across the country to see what's doing well, how many people are getting well served, all those things. And the fourth one is making sure we are investing in and supporting those medical workers, those frontline doctors and nurses and personal support workers and everyone who is doing such an incredible job, but who are burnt out and who need relief. And there are so many medically trained professionals from elsewhere around the world who we need to get into, who will come to Canada to get those jobs. You qualified on points because you are a doctor, and then you get here and you don't work. There is something broken in the system. Now, you can blame a lot of it, and some people do, on the provincial colleges of physicians and medical bodies that are guilds that keep people out, but really, it just is about political will at the federal level, at the provincial level, to get this done. And that is part of what we've put forward to make sure we do. Yes, you absolutely will have to be checked and verified and requalified to make sure that you're good, not just for protection of people, because we don't want someone coming into a doctor's office and saying, oh no, you were trained somewhere else in the world, you might be not as good as the doctor who was trained down the street. No, 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 you're just as good, if not better. You'll have to prove that, so it won't be instant, but it should be able to happen quickly. And that is one of the things that we have committed in this historic series of health deals that we've had as we negotiate with the province. It is going to be on much more rapid licensing of internationally trained professionals. It's going to be licensure across the country so that people can go to where the jobs are in different jurisdictions. It's going to be making sure that we are no longer squandering doctors who've been trained all around the world who are driving taxis or Ubers or working as bureaucrats when they should be serving patients. Thank you very much, Jana, for that question. Okay, I'm going to have to accelerate a little bit now. Any questions from here? Here you go. You were the first with the hand up. Yep, right here.
So Tansei, Taukis Kokosqueo Nitsigasan, Kanewokas Koteo Egwa Kiskawachuk no Chin. So my name is Kaylee Rain Anderson. I'm a student here. I'm in my I just finished my third year actually. I'm from George Gordon and Daystar First Nation here on Treaty 4 territory. So I wrote this, I didn't have a question, but again, it's this long blurb, kind of just me wondering, because we don't really get this opportunity often. And that's what the biggest thing is so I grew up on unceded Algonquin territory in Ottawa, and I moved here to Treaty 4 2 years ago. And the biggest thing I've noticed is that it's a privilege for us Indigenous youth to be present in these spaces. So my biggest thing was, out of the 7 calls to action directly regarding education, how confident are you that we as Indigenous educators, students, families can see the difference and like feel the difference in our school systems? Because I mean, there are things that need to change, but how confident are you that they've been changed? And how can we make these spaces more accessible? Because there's a lot of barriers that are blocking a lot of us students from being here. And not everyone, like I'm funded, so I have that privilege. But it's not a privilege for Indigenous people to be here in this place. The First Nations University Canada alone is some people's only option to reconnect back to their culture and language. So how can we make it more accessible for us to be present?
No, beautiful question. Thank you, Kaylee. One of the things we saw when we were starting to run, when I was starting to run in 2015, was that the investments in Indigenous education per student versus the provincial system, there was a massive disparity of about a third. And we needed to close that gap in terms of parity, at least funding, to make sure that the money invested in provincial school systems was not massively higher per student than the money invested in Indigenous schools and Indigenous students. And we did a pretty good job rapidly in the first years of fixing that funding gap on that level. But of course, as soon as you do that, it just reveals so many more gaps that at least you've got that. And we built a lot more new schools, and there are thousands of kids starting every year in new schools across the country in Indigenous communities and reserves. But then you see, as more kids start to graduate, you realize that the bottleneck of going to post-secondary education is still there as well. We need more funding on that we need more spaces on this. So there's a lot more work to do. But I can tell you that and to go back to Paula's question from the beginning, I believe we're reaching the point where your voice is no longer going to be able to be ignored by a future government the way Mr. Harper chose to ignore this community's voices for 10 years when he was in office. I think we've gotten to a place now where the relationship between this government, or between the federal government and Indigenous communities, the investments we've made that have empowered and shaped opportunities for Indigenous people across this country, have gotten to a place where the ability a government will have to pull that back is diminishing one day after another, because you are on a path to be able to have a voice that will roar and resonate. Not, one day once you become chief of your community, but now as a strong, present Aboriginal woman who will say, no, for my community, for my future kids, for the world I want to grow up in, I'm not taking any less than we have before, and there's lots more to do. But that's why it is so important that we know that for everything we're working on, there are real improvements, and that we are getting further along. And there's lots more to do. But know that there's always a danger of a backslide. There's always a danger of different priorities, and that's where your voice, fighting for it, yes, calling me out when we're not doing enough, absolutely, but making sure that your voice resonates loudly when comes time to decide what the next government will be, and who's going to be leading the next government, and what place reconciliation has in it. And telling that story, and this is one of the reasons I'm happy to be here today, Because I'll be honest, when I get out and engage on Indigenous issues, I'm often showing up at places like James Cree First Nation to talk about horrible tragedy that was there. I was at, I'm dealing with tragedies in Winnipeg. We're dealing with very difficult things happening in Tk'emlúps. And being able to be here to celebrate this extraordinary place and the progress that has been made in spite of federal governments many times, certainly in spite of provincial governments, in empowering and progressing this relationship that is so important to Canadians is part of it. But it requires constant attention and care and engagement. This country didn't happen by accident. It happened because people chose to build it and roll up their sleeves and do the hard work creating it generations ago, millennia ago. It didn't happen by accident, and it won't continue without effort, without stewardship, without us all caring for, without all of us stepping up to say, okay, we've made this progress, that's a good thing, but there's more to do. And at a time where it's so easy to be skeptical or even cynical about politics, don't let that blind you from the progress that has been made, knowing that there's lots more to do. Nobody's sitting back and saying, okay, we finished. There is no finish line on reconciliation. There are always going to be challenges, and as progressives, we always know there's more to do. But let us not see everything that there is still to do and think that's because we haven't been able to do tremendous things together over the past few years. That's one of the challenges we all have in democracies, and it's one that I know your voice is going to be very important for in the coming years. Thank you, Kaylee. Hey, another question. Yeah, let's go with you, sir.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm glad you touched two things about Ukraine and Russia. I have two questions to ask. One is about Ukraine and Russia.
First of all, what's your name?
Sorry. My name is Michael. I'm a student at the University of Regina doing international studies, majoring in international affairs. So, Mr. Prime Minister, Canada is traditionally known for advocating for peace. I know we are a member of NATO, but I know we don't have nuclear weapons like any other Western countries. In 2005, Canada initiated a responsibility to protect R2P, which became a global commitment under UN to protect against genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes of humanity. Why has your government failed to draft a peace proposal to end this war in Ukraine through diplomatic channels than becoming a part of a Western American hegemony, knowing that this is a proxy war between United States and Russia, which has resulted a lot of people dying? And my second question is about immigration. I know Canada is an open country, brings everybody in here, and I'm speaking from a policing perspective because I'm a member of Regina Police Service, and I know what the first responders are struggling with, most especially immigrants from the global south. So you bring immigrants over here, but there's nothing enough to integrate them within the society. Some of these people come over here with so much mental issues, but we kind of just throw them on the streets, and we don't actually teach them how to, to learn how to, to integrate within the society. So some of the problems that I meet on the street is most immigrants that are struggling with mental health that have not been oriented within the society, that are becoming actually a systematic problem for everybody, for the healthy issues, policing, and all that stuff. Some of them are not taught about or educated about the law. They fall in trouble, they catch a criminal record, and they will never turn out to be anything. So what is your government doing to actually be able to put so much within immigration so that these people can be integrated within the societies? Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Michael. Your second question first. On immigration, we have extraordinary community organizations and extraordinarily generous Canadians who are there to support new arrivals. I think of Open Door that I first visited for the first time about 10 years ago here in Regina, and the great work they're doing. And it's not easy. Listen, leaving everything you have behind you, particularly if you're leaving in a situation of trauma or war or conflict or discrimination or fleeing for your life, yes, once you arrive safe, you're going to be filled with guilt that there are family members back home that you haven't been able to save and who are still going through difficult things. And it's hard. Is it snowing outside? Yeah, it's snowing outside. Okay, so you came to Canada and it's snowing, and we just had a few beautiful days of So there are challenges when you come to Canada, and we need to do a better job, absolutely, of integrating and helping people succeed. But I also know that it's something that we have succeeded at over generations. The waves of immigrants that have built this country over the past century. Yeah, some of them faced very, very difficult times. You can talk to Greek Montrealers or Italian Montrealers and talk about the horrific discrimination that some communities that you wouldn't think would be discriminated against were discriminated against massively in the 40s. Think of the Komagata Maru or the St. Louis. Moments where ships were turned back because of racism and institutional racism in this country. We have a lot to learn, but we also do a better job than many. And there's lots more we can do, and the particular challenges around mental health are very real today that we need to do more on, but we will continue to do that as a welcoming country. On your first question, I'm going to have to call you out, Michael. You're completely wrong about the war in Ukraine. It is not a proxy war between the United States and Russia right now. That's Russian propaganda and disinformation. And my job is to call that stuff out. It was a deliberate choice by Vladimir Putin to invade a peaceful neighbor because he didn't like the direction people were going in terms of wanting more democracy and more freedom and engage more with Europe. And he saw that as a threat to his plan of building once again the mighty Russian Empire of 300 years ago. Not even rebuilding the Soviet Union, rebuilding the Tsarist period. He is a dictator and a bully, and the only thing we can do is stand up to bullies and saying, no, not on my watch. And that's what we are doing. Yes, it helps for Canada that we have such deep ties to Ukraine. That Ukrainians coming over here onto this beautiful prairie where it still snows in mid-April, and building an extraordinary country, contributing in so many ways to what this country is, means, yes, we're going to stand with Ukraine. But there's more than just a sense of loyalty. I mean, I think of everyone in the world, and we know how surprised Vladimir Putin was when Ukraine didn't fall in a few days or a few weeks. You know who wasn't surprised? Canadians. Do you know why? Because we know Ukrainians. We know how tough they are. We know how proud of their community, their identity. And we knew they were going to be able to fight to hold off this bully. And one of the reasons we knew is because since 2015, Canadians have been there in Ukraine training up their military to be able to tackle, take on, and turn around that Russian army when it showed up. But it's not just about Ukraine. It's about standing up for the values that underpin this country. Sovereignty, the right to pick your own future as a country. Territorial integrity, the right to not arbitrarily redraw lines on a map because, oh, people speak the same language as me. You know, we set those lines on a map and we built the UN Charter around protecting it, and for 80 years, we've had a level of peace and prosperity that has been unparalleled in global history. because of these kinds of rules that Vladimir Putin decided he could do away with, because he thought democracies were weak, because he was able to take Crimea and people didn't really do anything, didn't push back at that point. And then he took a little more and a little more, and finally we had the point where we had to say, okay, that's it. And yes, we have to go cap in hand to our citizens every few years to ask them, please, can you let me continue to govern? He sees that as a weakness. We know that is a strength. That is a strength that a government, by definition, has its people behind it, has a sense of values, of ambition, of lines we do not cross together. So when Canadians decided, no, Russia was wrong, we stood up. And more than that, not just for Russia and Ukraine did we have to stand up, but because every dictator in the world was looking at whether Vladimir Putin was going to be able to pull this off, whether he was going to succeed in his military adventure. And you know that anyone with a slightly larger army than their neighbor, who has designs on those fertile lands or those energy resources that are just across the border, could decide, hey, if it worked for Putin, maybe it'll work for me. And suddenly the world becomes a really different and more dangerous place. So no, this is not a proxy war. This is a moment where democracies get to look around and say, this matters. Which is why, as a country, we have clearly said, and will continue to say, we will be there to support Ukraine and Ukrainians with everything they need for as long as they need, until Vladimir Putin loses in this exercise, period. Thank you, Michael, for your question. That's right. Yeah, you, sir.
I'm Jules from BCW in Action, and I would like to ask my question in French.
Oh, bien sûr, mon ami.
Merci. Les recherches nous montrent que la population noire augmente à travers l'immigration, mais aussi les nouvelles naissances ici au Canada. Et tout d'abord, j'aimerais vous remercier pour vos efforts d'inclusion. C'est visible. Cependant, en réponse à la situation des entrepreneurs noirs, à un moment précis, vous avez mis en place le Black Entrepreneurship Program, qui est une très belle initiative. Cependant, du moins, le constat qui est fait, c'est qu'une grosse partie des bénéfices de ce programme vont vers le centre et l'est canadien. Ma question est celle de savoir qu'est-ce que votre gouvernement prévoit pour soutenir dans les prochaines années les entrepreneurs noirs, particulièrement dans les prairies et ici en Saskatchewan, et comment prévoyez-vous orienter les bénéfices pour qu'ils soient perceptibles par les entrepreneurs de notre région? Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Jus, pour ta question. Mais si vous permettez, je vais répondre en anglais. Si vous comprenez en anglais, là, c'est correct. It's okay. I can answer in so people can all appreciate it. Jus's question was about how we make sure that programs like the Black Entrepreneurship Strategy, which we established a few years ago at the request of the Black community across this country, understanding that there is terrible institutional racism and systematic discriminations and unconscious bias and real challenges that deliver anti-Black racism throughout our country. How to counter that, and I sat down with the Black community and we started saying, okay, what are the different things we could do? What can we do around the justice system? What can we do around community programs, everything? One of the first things came up for me was we need access to capital. We need more successful entrepreneurs because the barriers to access to capital for black businesses are far greater than for white businesses. Okay, so we built the Black Entrepreneurship Strategy. Now, Juice rightly pointed out that that a lot of the benefits of that program goes to the communities that are very well established in Toronto, in Montreal, and in Halifax and Preston, and in areas where the community has roots and anchored in and is able to benefit from these things. We do need a better job here, which is why I'm going to recommend that you get in touch with our local Prairie Can office, which is a Canadian regional development offices for the prairies, where we have significant investments to flow to support black entrepreneurs and through the Black Entrepreneurship Strategy and others. But it's also a reason, and I come back to the same thing, where if you had an MP to fight for you to make sure that you were listened to, you would be able to make sure your voice was stronger. We used to have Ralph. We don't anymore, and we would very much like to get a strong voice back for the prairies, for Saskatchewan, because the values and the perspective that you have here aren't always being very well represented by the folks who actually represent you as a monolithic bloc in Ottawa right now. But thank you. Lots more work to do. You, sir. Yes, you've been very patient. Right to the other side. Yeah.
My name is Ham Jatla. I've been in Saskatchewan for over 50 years. And my biggest problem is inner city poverty, housing, and mental health issues. We try and do as much as we can, but the federal government, somehow, if they can get into the fray of things, it would be a really nice thing. I know the Liberals have done lots, but right now, there's an elephant in the room. There is a lot of poverty in inner city. And somehow, we have to address this issue. I don't know how to address it. We do whatever we can. I belong to Guru Nanak Free Kitchen, so we try and do as much as we can. But again, if the federal government comes in and does at least get rid of there are a lot of, basically, there's a lot of mental health issues, more than anything else. Housing, poverty. Like I said, we talk about education, we talk about everything. Those are broken families living in poor neighborhoods. How do you bring them up? I know we immigrants have lots of issues. I think right now, our main issue should be to bring the people that really matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. The federal government will be there as a partner to try and solve for that. We've invested about $1.1 billion since 2015 in housing in Saskatchewan, which has resulted in the creation or renovation to proper standards of about 180,000 homes and units across the country, across the province, which, as we talk about the different determinants of health and well-being, that's an important piece of it. We are now encouraging strongly and forcing the province to reveal data around their investments in mental health to show how access to mental health is going to properly happen. We're working very much on investments around safer communities and community policing programs that, again, we're happy to do. But there's a bit of an elephant in the room for me as well, which is the fact that the federal government doesn't have direct responsibilities over cities. Canada is one of the most urbanized countries in the world. Over 80% of us live in cities in this country. And yet, in our Constitution, cities are creations and creatures of the provinces. So when it comes to funding municipal programs or projects, it's the responsibility of the province. Now, we have a situation right now where you have a federal government that has been elected very strongly in Atlantic Canada, rural and urban, and in cities across the country. We have presence in certain more rural areas, and we're always looking to do more and make sure that we're properly understanding and serving, whether it's farm communities or resource communities or rural communities across the country. But there is a political divide where conservatives, politically, are much more tied up in the less urban areas in the country. And what it means is when you have conservative premiers across the country, and not singling out Scott in any particular way, but there is a pattern that holds across the country, where the fights I used to have with Brian Pallister in Manitoba, who's no longer premier there, so I can talk about it, but trying to get him to take his share of infrastructure money to invest in public transit in Winnipeg, when all he wanted to do was build roads across the rural areas of the country. The challenges I continue to have with similar infrastructure challenges in New Brunswick with Blaine Higgs, where investing in cities is not in the mindset of a lot of conservative leadership. So through the pandemic, this was an emergency where we all got to work together. But whether you talk about CERB, whether you talk about the small businesses support, senior supports, youth supports, everything we did, Canada made it through because we were there and governments were there supporting you. 8 out of 10 dollars spent on the pandemic came from the federal government. And we stepped up and financed a huge amount of things that really helped in the provinces. We actually also transferred billions of dollars to the provinces that they used to balance their books in many places and show, see, hey, conservative governments are super responsible fiscally because, we're delivering all these services and we have fiscal balances. And those feds, man, they just spend so much money. We spent it on things like public transit operations for the provinces and supports for medical systems and healthcare to get us through this pandemic. And we did, and we're fine with that. The country got through, it's good for everyone. But we're now in a situation where the federal government is fiscally constrained because we have to be responsible. We have to keep our AAA rating. We have to keep the lowest debt to GDP ratio, which we have in the G7. We have to remain fiscally responsible, and we will, even as we're there for people. But provinces are going to have to start stepping up for their cities as well. And that is something that is across the board. I mean, I've had fights with Doug Ford on supporting Toronto, and I get along well with Doug. But he does have to be investing more in the city of Toronto. One of the last conversations I had with John Tory was about, you have to give us money to cover this because the province isn't giving it to us. I'm like, it's not my job to fund this. It shouldn't be all Canadians funding your city operations. It should be the province, and they have the money to do it. We know that because we sent them billions of dollars. So these challenges have to be part of the conversation we're having as a country right now. That yes, there need to be real investments by the government of Saskatchewan that I know is doing some, and Sandra certainly can tell me that they're there, but they could be doing more. And yes, the federal government will look for ways to be supportive and match funds and be there. But we have to make sure we're serving all Canadians across the country, and we also sort of try and respect the Constitution and saying, no, we're not going to be funding municipal affairs. But thank you very much for your question. Okay, last 3 questions from this section. I will take you, Tammy. I will take you in the back, and I will take you, you with the orange shirt. There we go.
Hello, Danette Starblanket, assistant professor at Johnson Choyama Graduate School, Public Policy, and sessional lecturer here at FNUC. My question is twofold. My first one is on NRTA. I'd like to see a federal commitment to address that. My Musham never gave up any resource rights, never, period. So I think that's really important that we get to the bottom of this. I know a lot of chiefs have been wanting to deal with this matter, and I think we need to get some sort of committee, or I don't care what it is, but we need that investigated. We have rights to these resources, period. I'd like to defer my second question to Vice Chief Ali Bear, who had her hand up, and she was not asked, please.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Danette. That means a lot. And yes, I agree. We need to have further discussions about resource revenue sharing and how, non-Indigenous people have been able to build their, be intergenerational wealth while we are dealing with intergenerational trauma. But my question is in regards to, Apeti Washe, good day. My name is Ali Bear. I'm from Wapahaska Oyate, which is Whitecap Dakota First Nation. I am the third vice chief of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. I'm also a Dakota Winyan, and I'm a lawyer, and I'm a mother. I am the exception. And I say that because I have 2 little girls who have to grow up in a society that I have to fear for their lives. Right next door in Manitoba, we have sisters being found in landfills. There is funding right now in women and gender equality, but there still has not been funded specifically for MMIW and our missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited Plus. Here in this province alone, the FSIN serves 128 families, and that's not all of them, and that's only in this province. This year, we had our first national gathering for MMIW in Vancouver, and there was thousands of families. And you know what? It's so under the radar. And I hate to say this, but would it be different if that was thousands of non-Indigenous women? And how come this continues to happen? As a mother, as a lawyer, I still have to walk through every day fearing for my own life and fearing for my daughters. And I'm sure all the rest of these Indigenous women here feel the same way. We should not have to live in fear in our society. But the problem is that the colonial violence has now transformed into lateral violence. So we're not only afraid in wider society, but we're also afraid in our own communities. So how are you going to be able to, do something to put the funding where we can feel safe in society again, and we can feel safe for our daughters to grow up in this country?
Thank you, Ali. Thank you. I'll take the question from the back now, and then the question from the front. So, yes, you, sir, you had a question. Stand up.
Thank you for the opportunity, Honorable Prime Minister. My name is Hughes Kandel. I'm a Canadian with the root of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Yes, Mr. Prime Minister, we need to stop the bully. We need to stop the political bullies. We need to stop the economical bullies as well. There are bullies that are in Africa. And we, Canadian, and official of Canada, supporting those bullies. What the government is doing to stop those bullies and denounce those bullies. There have been several people dead in the Democratic Republic of Congo with the war since 1997. 15 million of people we are counting now, including our friends and families. And I was regret one day to see the official supporting the countries that finance the terrorists that killing people in Democratic Republic of Congo. I can't mention the name.
Why not? Go ahead, mention the name.
The official of Rwanda. How we as officials do we convey our value, our Canadian value, in other parts of the world? When I'm talking the bullies, I'm not talking about just the official of Rwanda. I'm also talking about the mining company, the Canadian mining companies that are in war-torn zone in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We all know that energy renewable, climate change, the Democratic Republic of Congo is playing a major role in those aspects. why can't we cooperate with the official of the Democratic Republic of Congo than cutting the corner and supporting the bullies that are killing people? That's my first question.
We're going to make your second question quick, please, Hughes.
Thank you very much. Sorry?
Rapidement pour la deuxième question. Quickly for the second question, please.
Thank you. My other question is about the student loan. We look at the inflation that is happening here and the economic situation. How do we do as a government to alleviate the student loan? Thank you very much.
And final question, we're taking the two in the front, orange and red. And then I will answer all those questions rapidly.
Hello, my name is Nadia, and I'm PhD student in education. I'm also the Vice President of External Affairs at University of Regina Students Union. So my question is a question of many international students. And the question is that you talk about the support of the education by government, but my main question is that how you're going, the government going to support the international students after being graduated. Because we have many, many students who are graduated here in master, undergrad, and PhD, and they have no job safety, and they are going to different kinds of false job that is not related to their special area. So they have a very big challenge in finding a good job and job support for themselves. Because we moved here to have a better life, honestly. And my second question, very fast, is that what is the government support for make a better support of immigration process? I'm from Iran, okay? So when I want to have the biometric process, it took more than 5 months for me and for many Iranian people like me. And the problem was that after having biometric, going to the neighbor countries, we paid money, we bought tickets at that time, and many students were rejected. So I just want to know that how the government is going to have more support for international students, financially, job support, and immigration. Thank you.
Thank you. And your question?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Nice to see you again. People with disability in this province are living on an average of 11
Sorry,
to
what's
12.
your name?
My name is Allan Adam. I'm the student at the U of R. So people with disability in this province are living on 11 to 1200 on average. And that is unthinkable in 2023 to live on that money. So your government has introduced a bill to aim to provide financial aid to the people with disability across the country. And I have a question. How are you going to ensure that that money are being received by the students are good numbers enough that people can live with dignity? And also, how are you going to tackle the underlying issues the provincial government has clawing back money when the federal money kicks in the provincial budget?
Thank you. Okay, Danette, natural resources. There is no question that the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People lays out that there needs to be a involvement, inclusion in the benefits of the land to the people who've lived here for millennia. That is fundamental. There's no question about it. But right now, the conversation about getting the federal government to take back control of those resources is a non-starter. It's not going to happen. The federal government is not going to reopen the Constitution to take back control of natural resources. And the reason why there's multiple reasons why, but here's the concrete reason why you're asking for it. It's because you have a federal government right now that is serious about reconciliation, that has adopted the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, that has said, yes, we need to make sure that economic reconciliation and a stronger future is there for Indigenous peoples across this country. We need to build these partnerships and be joint stewards of the land. This is something we need to do, and it's something that we have demonstrated as a federal government that we are serious about doing. There is absolutely nothing preventing provincial governments from saying exactly the same thing. Indeed, there are provincial governments that have taken great strides towards that. I think of British Columbia, for example. where the nature of reconciliation is such that I'm taking lessons from what John Horgan was able to do a few years ago on how we adapt the UNDRIP into what we're doing. So right now, there is a little bit to this of shopping around for jurisdictions, saying, well, the federal government's willing to do more with us, so let's make sure that the federal government takes back control of the resources so they can do what they do and share with us. But that's not the way Canada works, because who knows, maybe, 5 years from now or 20 years from now, there'll be a government in Ottawa that is completely toxic to the idea of reconciliation. And it'll be someone like Kaylee, who's Premier of Saskatchewan, who's going to be all about saying, oh my God, why did we give up natural resource control because we'd be doing it for there to Ottawa? The solution on that is making sure that every order of government, from federal to provincial to municipal, is serious and committed to using the tools and the powers they have to advance reconciliation and this relationship. So I'm flattered by the fact that you think the federal government should step in and save you in this situation. But that doesn't sustain this system for the long term. Governments change. The Constitution shouldn't. The Constitution is part of what packages those Section 35 rights that give you such ground to stand on in these conversations. The federal government has adopted UNDRIP. The conversation has to take place, even though it's a harder conversation, with the provincial government that has control over natural resources in the division of powers of our Constitution, to make sure that Indigenous communities are benefiting from this land that they have been stewards of here on Treaty 4 territory and elsewhere across the country for millennia. It is a harder conversation than the conversation with me. There's no question about it. But it has to happen. Not just it has to happen because it's the right thing to do, but if Saskatchewan is going to be drawing in global investment, if Saskatchewan's going to be that kind of partner that wants to show we can do mining and potash and uranium that is selling to the world in incredibly important moments, and yet they can't demonstrate a positive working relationship with Indigenous peoples, people will just say, you know what, I'm going to try and find that potash from somewhere else, because Indigenous peoples aren't part of the success. And we want to be one of the good guys. We want to be aligned with the good guys, and consumers around the world are asking for that. When you buy something, you want to know it was made cleanly, it was made responsibly, with good labor laws, with respect of Indigenous peoples. The world is going to catch up. Hopefully, provincial governments will understand it is in their deep interest to take as seriously reconciliation as we do at the federal level. So thank you for that question, Danette. Next question from Ali around MMIWG. It is an ongoing tragedy. We did the national inquiry. We put forward a national action plan that is part of the roadmap towards that. We put millions of dollars towards it, but there is so much more to do. And you were laying it out absolutely clearly. The layers of trauma, of factors that go into this. You talk about lateral violence as well, which is something that we're all trying to grapple with as well. There is a huge amount of work to do it, because it's not true that you should feel afraid to walk the streets of your land. There are too many people living in fear in this country. Women who wear hijabs continue to be attacked in parts of the world, in parts of this country, in unacceptable ways. There is a lot of work we need to continue to do, but top of mind for all Canadians should be the ongoing tragedy and trauma that is the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, that we have to continue to stand up for, be there for these women, these grandmothers, these aunties, these sisters, these mothers, these daughters who continue to be valued less by our system, despite improvements, but seen as less than anyone else. And that is unacceptable in this country. It's why we're committed to doing whatever we can, and there's much more to do, and we will do it together, Ali. Thank you. Youth, DRC, Africa continues to be a place that Canada has deep ties with. We've built wells, we've built schools, we've been part of the humanitarian support for Africa for centuries, or for generations now, since the independence movement happened through the middle of the 20th century. Right now, our partnerships are much less about giving fish than teaching to fish, building economic partnerships, seeing the coming up of African youth and innovators and entrepreneurs as a tremendous opportunity for trade. We want to be the first non-African country with a free trade deal with the trade union that Africa is talking about creating. I think there are tremendous opportunities and potential for Canada and Africa to do much together. There continue to be real challenges around stability, around dictatorships, around corruption. And Canada is not a country that has the weight, or in many cases, the ability to dictate who should get elected in this country or not. We do the best we can to work with the countries who are there, the leadership that is there. We celebrate the victories, we call out the human rights abuses, and we continue to know that more colonial thinking, as we know very well from our own experiences with colonialism, no matter how great the solution might seem from over here that would fix things over there, if you're not building that solution with people on the ground who live there, who are there, nothing about you without you, you're not building a real solution. So we will continue to be there for Africa. We will continue to accompany, we will continue to call out abuses, we will continue to help build improvements. But it's a long road, and we will continue to walk it together. In terms of student loans, listen, we just increased student loans and grants in this most recent budget. As of a month ago, there are no more interest payments on student and apprenticeship loans in this country. And you don't even have to start paying them back until you're making about $45,000 a year. These are things that we did to make sure that it is reflected that your education is not just you investing in yourself, it's all of us investing in the future of this country, and we need you to have access to the best possible education we can. Last two questions, one from Nadia on international students. Yes, we need to create better pathways for international students to stay in this country, to contribute to it, to be jobs. You've gone through this education system, you've got a place to stay, you've got homes, you've got opportunities. You're going to be able to, you need to be able to find pathways to citizenship. We are making improvements on that, and we will continue to. The difficulty around immigration issues from Iran is because we no longer have an embassy in Iran. We removed it in the last years of the Harper administration for security reasons. We couldn't keep the Canadians safe there, and our current deep disagreement and condemnation of the current regime of Iran is such that we're not going to be establishing an embassy there anytime soon. The murderous and illegitimate actions by the current Iranian government need to be condemned in the most forceful way. And as is so often the case, it is the citizens who suffer, the people of Iran who have long been extraordinary, well-educated, open, engaged people. And we all discovered it as Canadians a few years ago in the terrible downing of PS 752. Ukrainian Airlines flight that was shot down by the Iran Revolutionary Guard because of terrible incompetence, mismanagement, and criminal negligence by the Iranian government and disregard for people's lives and well-being. And we all discovered that these students, these Iranian Canadians who were coming back and forth, were at the heart of our universities, of our academics, extraordinary community leaders and business leaders who just gave so much to Canada. And it was an eye-opening moment for many Canadians to see just how extraordinary the Iranian Canadian community is and what it gives to Canada. And we want to do so much, but it is so difficult with this current murderous regime that is being so strongly stood up against by brave, brave schoolgirls and grandmothers with cries of Zandegi Azadi, women, life, freedom, that will continue. And finally, the last question from Dev. It seems like there's a theme here today, but the concern, we are moving forward at the federal level with a recognition that one of the most discriminated against and one of the most economically disadvantaged communities in this country is Canadians living with disabilities. The poverty rates are higher than just about anywhere else. Of course, people with disabilities cut across every possible intersectionality as well. And we need to do a better job of supporting Canadians with disabilities. That's why we moved forward with the Canadian Disability Act. We're moving forward in the process of establishing direct federal supports for people living with disabilities. And one of the very key problems we're busy working out is how, as we deliver aid to people living with disabilities, it is not simply clawed back by the province, that will reduce its own supports for people living with disabilities so they can spend it elsewhere. We need to make sure we are doing better by Canadians living with disabilities, and we will continue to do that. Thank you so much, Steph. The time has come, long since passed, for us to have ended. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for all your questions, for your attentiveness, for your interest. But I hope mostly that you have been reinvigorated in your engagement as active, involved citizens in your communities. We all have things that we're passionate about. We all have things that we want to see improved or changed in the world around us. And sitting back and hoping that someone gets elected and does something about it is not always the best path in a democracy like ours. Step up. Make your voice heard. Make sure that the people that you elect, the people who serve you and represent you, are being accountable to give answers in complete sentences to the very real questions we have. Politics in complete sentences was actually a line from my friend, the former mayor of Calgary, Nahid Nenshi, who knew a lot about trying to be reasonable and thoughtful in sometimes very polarized environments. He did a great job of it, and I know that all of us can do well to continue to have real conversations and make sure we're listening to each other on the challenges we're facing, even when we disagree with each other, like I did with you, Michael. But it is a pleasure. Sorry, I don't mean to single you out, but I love getting a little back and forth going. Thank you for being here. Merci d'être ici. Bonne soirée tout le monde.